The afternoon light spilled through the open doorway of the log cabin, soft as breath upon the wooden floor. It filtered through drifting flour, catching each particle like floating gold. The woman's hands moved in rhythm, slow and sure, pressing and folding the dough with a tenderness that came not from ease, but from endurance. The sound of kneading filled the air, steady, like a heartbeat, and mingled with the small laughter of the child beside her. The girl's curls shimmered pale under the light, a wild halo around a face flushed with joy. She giggled as her mother shaped the dough into small round loaves, her tiny fingers mimicking the motion. The cabin smelled of wheat and smoke, of home built from persistence rather than comfort. Outside, wind stirred the pines, and the distant creek murmured its endless hymn. A lone horse snorted somewhere down the trail. The woman didn't look up. She'd learned that the forest often whispered before it revealed, but the girl turned toward the door, her eyes bright. A tall figure filled the doorway, framed by sunlight and dust. For a moment he stood motionless, as though unsure whether to cross the threshold. The woman finally looked up, her hands still resting in the dough. His coat was black, heavy with travel. His beard caught the light like charcoal rubbed in gold. He spoke softly, his voice rough as gravel. "Afternoon, ma'am. I mean no harm." Her gaze lingered a moment longer than caution allowed. "You've come far." "From a ridge," he said, glancing over his shoulder as if the distance carried ghosts. "Lost my trail. Storms come in fast." She nodded once and wiped her hands on her apron. "Then you'll need warmth." The girl peeked around her mother's skirt, her smile wide and fearless. "You got snow on your hat," she said. The man gave a small laugh, the kind that sounds surprised to exist. "Do I now?" He brushed his hat against his coat and stepped inside. The door creaked shut behind him, sealing them in a pocket of warmth and silence. The fire burned low, throwing amber light across the walls. The man set down his hat, his presence filling the small room like an unexpected memory. The woman stirred the pot on the stove, pretending not to notice how his gaze wandered, first to the child, then to the shelves lined with herbs and dried flowers, then finally to the bread rising on the table. "You live alone?" he asked. "Not alone," she said, without turning. "The forest keeps company. The child keeps me alive." The girl grinned. "And I eat all the bread." Her mother smiled faintly, then poured stew into a wooden bowl. "Sit. Eat before you fall over." He hesitated, as though unsure if he deserved the offer, then sat at the small table. His hands were rough, scarred from work and weather. He ate slowly, every bite seeming to thaw some hidden layer of his soul. "You make a man forget he's been on the road," he murmured. "Food's meant to make us remember," she replied. He looked up at that, the firelight flickering in his dark eyes. "Remember what?" "That we're still human." The child climbed onto the bench beside him, swinging her legs. "Mama says kindness is medicine." "Your mama's a wise woman," he said, smiling softly. For a while, the only sound was the wind scratching against the cabin walls. Then the woman asked, "Your name?" "Elias." He set down his spoon. "And yours?" "Names don't change much. People forget them anyway. But I'm called Mara." He repeated it once, quietly, as if the word itself had a weight he wanted to carry. When the meal was done, Mara wrapped the rest of the bread in cloth and placed it on the sill to cool. Elias rose, offering her a coin. She shook her head. "Keep your money. You're tired, not hungry for debt." "I don't take favors." "It's not a favor," she said, looking him straight in the eyes. "It's what keeps the world from freezing over." Something in his expression softened, an old sorrow easing, if only slightly. "Then I owe you warmth at least." He moved to the hearth and began mending a loose hinge on the shutter. The child watched him, her chin propped on her hands. "You fix things," she said. "Try to," he replied. "Don't always work." Mara wiped her hands, the faintest smile touching her lips. "Most things worth fixing don't work the first time." Outside, thunder rolled low and distant. Elias straightened, the faint tremor of weariness visible in his shoulders. "Won't trouble you long," he said. "Storm'll pass." She glanced toward the darkening sky through the doorway. "Storms don't ask how long they'll stay." He chuckled, low and almost grateful. Neither do some people. Night came sudden, silvering the forest through the open cracks of the cabin walls. The rain started as a whisper, then grew until it drowned the silence. Mara lit another lamp. The warm glow settled on Elias's face, tracing lines of exhaustion and history. He had the look of a man who had walked too far from forgiveness. The girl, half asleep beside the hearth, murmured, "Mama, tell the story." "Which one?" "The one where the river remembers its name." Mara's voice lowered, gentle and rhythmic. She told it, as she had 100 times before, a tale of a river that lost itself in drought, until the rains returned and it remembered it was meant to flow. Elias listened, motionless, as if the story were washing through him. When it ended, he said softly, "I knew a river like that once. Thought it ran dry for good." "Rivers don't die," she said. "They just wait to be found." The lamp flickered, shadows swaying across the walls. Elias reached into his coat pocket and pulled something small, a carved wooden horse, worn smooth from travel. He set it on the table, beside the cooling bread. "For the girl," he said. Mara's eyes softened. "You carve." "Sometimes. When I need to remember gentler things." The little girl stirred and smiled in her sleep, as if hearing him. When the storm passed, the forest went still again, wrapped in mist. Elias stood, pulling on his coat. "I best be off. You've done more than you know." She looked up, startled. "You'll ride at dawn then?" "Before it," he said. "There's trouble near the ridge. Men I trusted turned mean. I can't stay long." The child stirred awake. "You'll come back." Elias knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead. "If I can," he said softly. Mara watched the exchange in silence, her heart caught between sense and hope. When he straightened, she held out the last loaf of bread. "Take this. For the road." He hesitated, then took it, his fingers brushing hers. A quiet current passed between them, something fragile, unnamed. He opened the door. Pale dawn light pooled at his feet. "You've given a stranger more kindness than I ever earned," he said. Her voice was calm, but trembled at its edges. "Then don't waste it." Elias nodded once, then stepped into the fading rain. His footsteps disappeared down the trail, leaving only the scent of wet pine and the echo of something unfinished. Mara stood in the doorway, the child leaning against her side, both watching until the trees swallowed him whole. When she turned back inside, her eyes fell upon the table. The carved horse remained. He'd left it behind. The tiny figure caught the morning light, casting a shadow that reached across the flour-dusted boards, pointing toward the open door, where the world waited to test the fragile warmth he had left behind. Winter came early that year, crawling down from the high ridges in slow, merciless breaths. Frost webbed across the cabin windows like veins of white fire, and each dawn found the forest sealed in silence beneath its own glassy shroud. Mara rose before the sun, wrapped in a shawl the color of river stone, and fed the fire with careful hands. The dough would not rise as quickly in the cold, but she still made it, 2 loaves every morning, one for them, and one for no one. It had become a ritual, quiet and stubborn, as though the second loaf kept hope alive. The girl, now pale from too many days indoors, traced patterns on the frosted glass with her finger. "Do you think he's warm where he is?" she asked. Mara did not answer at first. The crackle of the fire filled the space where truth might have lived. "The world has many kinds of warmth," she said at last. "Some you find, some you remember." Outside, a hawk circled low, its cry carrying through the frozen air. The cabin's roof creaked under the weight of snow. Each sound reminded her that silence could be fragile, that something might still be listening. By mid-season, the trail to town was nearly impassable, but the townsfolk found reasons to come to her door. Widow May arrived first, wrapped in layers of gray wool, her breath puffing like smoke. "You got the best bread this side of the river," she said, though her eyes held a question she never voiced. Mara traded 2 loaves for salt and a few stories about the ridge. They said men were stealing cattle again, and one ranch burned clean to ash before the snow fell. The rancher's name was Elias. The words settled over Mara like dust in sunlight, silent, slow, impossible to ignore. She felt them in her bones, though her face remained still. She finished tying the bread in cloth and handed it to the widow. "Storms take what they please," she said softly. That night she did not sleep. The wind clawed at the cabin walls, and every gust sounded like a voice calling from the distance. The girl stirred in her bed, murmuring dreams. Mara rose, lit the lamp, and set it by the window. Its light bled into the snow, a small defiance against the dark. Days became weeks, and the lamp remained. The second loaf each morning became a quiet promise. Sometimes she thought she heard hoofbeats in the distance, but when she stepped outside, only snow fell, and only her own breath filled the silence. Sheriff Grant rode up one afternoon, his horse steaming from the climb. He was a kind man in his way, shaped more by duty than malice. "You heard the talk, I reckon," he said, dismounting. "About the rancher." "I hear what the wind carries," she replied. He shifted uneasily. "There's men still looking for him. Not all of 'em lawmen. If you see any stranger near your place, keep that rifle close." She nodded. "I have the fire, Sheriff. It burns hot enough." The sheriff tipped his hat and rode off, leaving the warning hanging like smoke in the air. As the snow deepened, hunger began to test them. The flour ran low, the woodpile smaller each day. Tommy, the boy from town who sometimes helped split logs, stopped coming, his mother too sick to spare him. Mara felt the weight of each silence more heavily. Even the forest seemed to watch, holding its breath. Then one evening, as the light faded violet across the horizon, the girl found something in the snow outside the door, a small, wooden carving half buried beside the step. The little horse, the same one Elias had left behind. Mara froze, her breath catching like a snare pulled tight. She turned the carving over in her palm, its edges smooth and warm despite the cold. The girl's eyes were wide. "He came back," she whispered. "Maybe," Mara said, though her heart had already begun to race. "Or maybe the wind just remembers where to return what's lost." She stepped outside, scanning the woods. The snow lay unbroken, except for faint tracks near the creek, boot prints, blurred by wind but fresh enough to matter. She followed them as far as the trees, the cold biting at her face, the silence pressing close. Then she saw it, a dark shape slumped against the base of a pine. Elias. He was barely conscious, his coat torn, one side of his face streaked with blood. His horse stood tethered nearby, trembling. Mara dropped to her knees beside him, her pulse roaring in her ears. "You fool," she whispered. "You stubborn fool." He tried to speak, but only a rasp came. She pressed her hand to his cheek, felt the icy skin beneath. "Hush. Save it for the living." With the strength of desperation, she half carried, half dragged him back to the cabin, leaving a trail of red across the white snow. Inside, she laid him near the fire, tearing strips of cloth to bind his wounds. The girl fetched water, her small face pale but determined. When Elias finally stirred, his eyes flickered open, dazed. "Didn't mean to bring trouble," he breathed. "You never mean to," Mara said, her tone sharp but trembling. He winced as she cleaned a gash along his ribs. "They came for me, men I once rode with. Took the herd, burned the ranch. I ran south, thought I lost 'em. And if you didn't, then they'll come here," he said, his voice breaking. Mara stopped, her hand still against his chest. "You should have stayed gone," she said quietly. "Didn't know where else to go." Her eyes softened, though anger still flickered beneath. "The forest isn't kind to those who come running from ghosts." He looked at her, the weight of shame in his eyes. "You told me not to waste your kindness. I tried." The fire cracked between them. She turned away, stirring the pot on the stove, her hands trembling. The girl, sitting cross-legged by the hearth, watched them both as if the air itself had changed color. For 3 days, Mara kept him alive. She boiled herbs, whispered songs half forgotten, and pressed warmth into his skin with every breath. Sometimes he muttered in fever, fragments of his past spilling out, names, regrets, prayers without saints. She listened, but never asked. Some wounds bled slower than others. By the 4th morning, his fever broke. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the shutters, gold and pure. Elias opened his eyes, and for the first time, clarity replaced pain. "You could have left me," he said. "I thought about it," she replied. "But the forest has too much silence already." He smiled faintly. "You're stronger than most men I've known." "And you're weaker than most truths I've buried," she said, though the words held no malice. Outside, the snow began to melt, the earth showing through in dark streaks. Hope, fragile and trembling, crept into the world again. But Mara's eyes kept drifting toward the woods, toward the place where the tracks had vanished. That night, as Elias slept and the child dreamed, Mara stepped outside. The moon hung low, white as bone. The snow glistened beneath it, clean and deceptive. She felt the forest's breath around her, still and waiting. Then, faint but certain, came the echo of hooves. Not one horse. Several. She turned toward the sound, her pulse steady, her face unreadable. Somewhere inside the cabin, the lamp still burned by the window, a single flame in the dark. She reached for the rifle by the door, the wind catching her hair like a whisper. "They found him," she murmured. And behind her, through the half-open door, the little carved horse gleamed in the firelight, its wooden shadow stretching long toward the place where danger was coming. Dawn bled slowly over the horizon, a pale wash of gold over snow that had hardened to glass. The world outside the cabin was still, but it was a kind of stillness that came before movement, before something unseen decided to break. Mara stood in the doorway, shawl pulled tight, the rifle resting against her shoulder. She could feel the earth hum beneath her boots. Hoofbeats, distant yet certain, rolled through the valley like a warning carried on cold air. Inside, the fire whispered low, and Elias stirred awake, his face drawn and pale, but his eyes sharp. He heard it too. "They found me," he said, his voice rough with certainty. Mara did not turn. "Then the forest will hear what we're made of." The girl appeared beside the hearth, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama." "Stay inside," Mara said gently, not looking back. "Keep the fire alive." Elias tried to rise, but the pain in his ribs drove him back to the cot. "You can't face them alone," he said. "I faced worse than men before you ever crossed that ridge," she answered, stepping outside into the morning cold. Her breath curled white against the air, merging with mist that rose from the frozen earth. Through the thinning fog, 3 riders emerged, dark shapes against the silver snow. The lead man's coat was torn, his hat low, the look of someone who'd traded his soul for coin long ago. Behind him rode 2 others, rifle slung, faces hidden by scarves. Elias's former partner, she guessed, the kind of man who'd once shared a fire, now come to snuff it out. He called out before he reached the gate. "Morning, ma'am. Heard you're keeping company with a thief." Mara's grip tightened around the rifle. "You heard wrong. I keep company with the wounded, not the wicked." The man laughed. "All the same, to most folks, that rancher of yours stole from me and mine." Elias's voice came from the doorway, ragged but steady. "You stole the cattle, Boone. You burned the ranch. I buried what you left." Boone smirked, guiding his horse closer. "That's your story, sure. But it's my word against yours. And you don't look fit to argue." Mara stepped forward, her feet sinking into the snow. The rifle stayed low, not threatening, but ready. "No man who hides behind lies deserves the ground he rides on," she said softly. "Turn back before the truth finds you." Boone tilted his head, amused. "Truth don't feed a man, lady. Gold does. And I plan on leaving here with both." Behind him, one of the men shifted, uneasy. The forest around them was silent except for the crows watching from the pines. Even they seemed to wait. Elias pushed himself upright, leaning against the doorframe. "You want me, Boone. Leave her and the child out of it." Boone's smile faded. "Oh, I intend to. But you made your choice when you ran here. Folks will talk, you know, about the Apache woman who took in a ranch thief. Towns don't forgive that kind of story." Mara's voice came like a wind through dry leaves, gentle, but with edges. "Then let them talk. I stopped needing the town's forgiveness long ago." Boone dismounted, boots crunching against the frost. "You should have stayed hidden, lady. Kind hearts get you killed." He raised his gun. The shot cracked through the air, echoing across the valley. Mara didn't flinch. She had already moved, pressing the rifle to her shoulder, firing once into the snow near his feet. The sound was thunder in the stillness, sending crows screaming into the sky. "Next one," she said calmly, "won't miss." For a moment, no one moved. The other two riders exchanged uncertain looks. Boone's bravado flickered, but pride chained him in place. "You got nerve," he muttered, lowering his weapon slightly. "But you can't shoot your way out of this." "Who said I need to?" came another voice, the sheriff's. Grant rode out from the trees, his coat dusted with frost, his rifle already drawn. Two deputies followed behind. Boone's face twisted, realization dawning too late. "Got word you might be riding this way," the sheriff said. "Didn't figure you'd be fool enough to threaten a woman under my protection." Boone tried to speak, but the deputies closed in, disarming him. One of the other men bolted into the trees. The sheriff let him run. The forest would take care of its own justice. When Boone was bound, the sheriff looked toward Mara and Elias. "You've got a way of collecting trouble, both of you." "Trouble's the one thing that always knows where to find the hungry," Mara said quietly. The sheriff gave a tired smile. "Maybe so. But this time it found its end." He nodded toward Boone. "We'll see he gets what's due." They rode off through the thinning fog, the sound of hooves fading until only the whisper of wind remained. The world exhaled again, as though the forest itself had been waiting for permission to breathe. Inside, the girl rushed to her mother's arms. "Mama, you didn't fall," she said, half laughing, half crying. Mara knelt, pressing her forehead to the child's. "The forest kept me standing," she whispered. Elias stepped forward, his face pale, but his eyes bright with something close to awe. "You faced them down like they were shadows," he said. "They were," she replied. "All men are, when truth finds the light." He touched her arm, the one grazed by Boone's bullet. A thin line of red streaked through her sleeve. "You're hurt." She shook her head. "It missed the heart." He smiled faintly. "That's what I'm afraid of." "Mine didn't." The words hung between them, soft as breath. For once, Mara did not look away. "You think love will fix what this world breaks?" "No," he said. "But maybe it can keep us warm while it tries." The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. The girl began to hum, a small tune Mara used to sing when the nights felt endless. Elias sat beside the hearth, exhaustion and gratitude mingling in his eyes. The silence between them no longer felt hollow, it felt full. Days passed, and the thaw came slowly. Snow retreated into the earth, revealing patches of green beneath. The forest dripped with new life. Elias stayed, mending fences and helping split wood. The child followed him everywhere, carrying small tools and endless questions. Mara watched them from the doorway, her hands dusted with flour, her heart still learning the shape of peace. One evening, as the sun melted behind the ridge, she broke 2 loaves of bread at the table. The smell filled the cabin, warm, simple, eternal. She placed one loaf before Elias, the other before the empty space across from her. "For those who hurt," she said softly, "and those who forgive." He looked at her, understanding in his eyes. "And which are we?" "Both," she said. "Always both." Outside, the first wildflowers began to bloom where blood once stained the snow. The forest, as if recognizing something sacred, fell into a hush. The girl laughed, chasing fireflies through the doorway. Mara stepped into the fading light, feeling the air turn gentle on her skin. Elias joined her, their shoulders brushing. Neither spoke. Words would have been too small for what lingered between them. Far beyond, the last traces of the storm dissolved into the horizon. The forest no longer felt like a place of exile, but a belonging. As night settled, the child's laughter faded into the hum of crickets, and the stars unfolded like a promise across the sky. Mara looked toward the woods, where the path vanished into shadow. "The world doesn't change," she whispered. "Only the heart's willing to stay." Elias reached for her hand, rough and warm against hers. "Then let's stay."